my loves, and welcome to a rarefied book review on a Wednesday. Can you believe it? Yes, I'm trying to clear my backlog, but unfortunately it's not science fiction or even fantasy that we're looking at today. It's a series of short stories by Peter James, A Twist of the Knife. So we're looking at crime here with a little spattering of the paranormal. This was published, let's get the cover up, my loves. This was published back in 2014, and as we can see on the top there, it says 16 million copies sold. Well, since then it's gone up by a fair sum. We're now looking at 21 million copies sold. The git. But anyway, this means that this writer is very, very popular. Yeah, so Peter James is a British author. He published his first book back in 1981 and has been quite prolific, really. He's released 36 books in the intervening years, 21 of them of which are to do with the Roy Grace series, which is about a detective based over in Brighton, a city down on the south coast, East Sussex that would be. A really splendid and progressive city, but there we are. They need a detective to sort out all manner of shenanigans that might be going on down there. Now, I'll just read you some of the titles of said series, the Roy Grace ones. See if you can notice something that links them all together, my love. So here we go. Dead Simple, Looking Good Dead, Not Dead Enough, Dead Man's Footsteps, Dead Tomorrow, Dead Next Tuesday, Dead a Few Months From Now, Roger Me Until I'm Dead. Of course, I made those last few up, but of course, you understand what I'm getting at here. If you have a long-running series, you better hope that your titles live to see the book into the future. I mean, I don't know if he ever envisaged it lasting this long, but he has missed a glaringly obvious title that he might have used, and that is Dead as a Doornail, my loves. So perhaps coming your way in 2026, we can only hope. But up until now, the only thing I've read of his work, and I read this back when I was a student actually studying art over in Bath. And so my friend over in France, she saw Peter James there at a book festival, quite a big one over in France. What is it called again? Salon de Livre. Yes, and she was there, he was there. She said, would you mind signing this book for my dear friend John? And look, he's done just that. So he's written here to John, all best, it should be all the best, and something that looks a little bit like Peter James. He hasn't put that much effort into it, dear chap, but of course I wasn't there, so that's the best we can hope for when yours truly isn't staring him right in the noggin. The last thing I'll get to before we start reviewing the book is my wife suggested this book to me, so I have to be very, very careful what I say. Okay, so yes, we haven't got just crime here. We have, as I said earlier, a little sprinkling of the paranormal in terms of stories, ghost stories and the like. We've also got some true life accounts of some paranormal activity that Peter James witnessed himself, and someone else that does exorcisms, which is quite interesting. We've also got a little dalliance with science fiction, although it's kind of light, kind of science fiction light, if you will, but some interesting ideas explored within that genre that he's attempted. But I'm not going to go through each and every story because there are 30 of the devils, but what I will do is pick out 3 of my favourite ones and tell you a little bit about them. There will be no spoilers, my love, so don't worry about that. But before we do that even, I will do a small critique of Peter James's writing and his story formulation as it pertains to these short stories. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the first thing I would say is that it was quite refreshing to read something from a contemporary British author, shall we say, the British tongue, if you will, the vernacular, the slang. Bit of British humour there, vulgar at times, a little bit of sex here and there, because I read mostly American stuff these days as it pertains to the vintage science fiction of the 60s and 70s primarily. So this is quite a big world of difference between the two, and of course words are all spelt correctly. Naughty, sorry. No, but it's very familiar. It's easy for me to read, which I quite appreciated. So not only was I able to pass the language quite readily because it's my own mother tongue, shall we say, but the writing itself was quite simple. So it's easy. I mean, it's not going to win any awards for the quality of its prose, but it does the job. His storytelling is very good. He offers up various possibilities, and there are lots of twists. It keeps you turning the pages. However, I did notice a certain sloppiness here and there, a slight laziness, one might say. The repetition of adjectives, a couple of sentences in a row. I don't like that kind of thing. I don't blame Peter James so much as his editor, perhaps. I think he was just knocking these out and they weren't correctly edited, perhaps. But I don't like seeing that. It doesn't show care and attention. As I said, there are lovely twists here and there, but sometimes those twists turn out to be very obvious. And so a few paragraphs into a particular story, you'll already know what's going to be rearing its ugly head. Sometimes you are surprised, though, so I'm not going to be completely savage in this regard. Now, with these stories, there's a lot of depictions of the way people live their lives, the familial setting, couples engaged in amorous affairs and the like. I find this a very tricky thing to be portrayed in writing. It's very hard to get right, and I don't think he occasionally gets it right. Sometimes he doesn't, and when he doesn't, it makes me cringe a bit because I suppose you can only really draw on your own experiences of interactions in a social setting, love lives and what have you. But some of these do not ring true. But it's a very hard thing to do. I've never been able to do it myself. But there we are. He should be doing better, my loves. The only other thing I would say about this, when you've got a book that's crammed full of 30 individual stories, it's inevitable there's going to be a bit of overlap. So if we take, say, the paranormal ones, there are lots. There's a damn good few of them that have the same kind of punchline, if you will. I think this is inevitable. When they were originally published in magazine form, I'm assuming, no problem at all. But as soon as you've got them all standing cheek by jowl, shall we say, you notice the similarities and it occasionally pisses you off. And I think that's responsible for me occasionally working out what was going on before I'd even got anywhere near the end, because they are kind of similar at times. But one thing I really do like, and I've encountered this before with other short story collections, I love it when it's prefaced with a bit of information about the story, where it was originally published, the reason it was written, what inspired the story. And Peter James does do that occasionally, which I really do like to have a bit of context to the story at times, especially as it pertains to his real life accounts of his own experiences of the paranormal and occult, shall we say. That was really interesting. And there are a couple of stories that are incredibly short, and I will read you one of them because it's barely 5 lines long. Where is it? Smoking Kills, it's called. 139. I mean, I don't like to hear about the perils of smoking or inhaling various things because I don't like to think of the damage I've done to myself in the past, but there we are. So I'm going to read this story to you. This is prefaced with a little sentence saying, a very short story based on a true incident. Now, I do have cause to doubt this, but I'll explain why in a moment. You have a last request? Uh-huh. Could I have a cigarette? I'm sorry, this is a no-smoking execution chamber. It's not going to kill me, you know. You're right about that, sunshine. That's the story. Now, that would be quite amusing. I'm assuming this is something that perhaps happened over in America, where gas chambers are used, perhaps. But as far as I know, executions were never carried out over here in gas chambers. It was always hanging. And if it was over in America, I don't think the guard or the execution attendant would say sunshine at the end of the sentence. That's quite a British thing. But there we are. I'm just being a bit pedantic, my lady. I'm sorry, I'm very dishevelled this evening. I've just had a shower to try and cool my tits down because it's so fucking hot in here. And that's why my hair still looks all wet and not as sexy as usual. But anyway, let's get to the 3 stories that I actually quite liked. Okay, so the first one is called A Dead Simple Plan. And as you might have noticed, this does relate to the Roy Grace stories. This is the short story that began the Roy Grace series. Quite interesting. This was the genesis of it all. And it is quite a powerful short story. So picture this, my loves. It's a stag do. A young buck, a young groom, is on the last day of his freedom, shall we say, before being married. He's getting married the next day. Yeah, we call them stag doos over here. I believe down in Australia you call them bucks. Is it bucks doos or something like that? And over in America it's what did you call it? Bachelor parties, that kind of thing. But you get the idea. But anyway, so the stag in question has been a bit of a mischievous fucker in the past and stitching his friends up when they're getting married and doing various japes on them. So they decide to do the mother of all japes on this poor chap. What do? It's very far-fetched, but they decide to bury him alive in a coffin at some remote place in the woods. No one knows where the hell it is. They stick him in a coffin, bury him down there. They give him a CB radio so they can laugh at him while he's down in the coffin. And if he's got his mobile phone. And a big bottle of whiskey. Everything one would need for a night spent in a coffin. Now, I can't say too much more without spoiling it, but let's just say no one knows where he's buried. And on the trip back, his friends may get waylaid in some way. That's all I'm saying. But it was a wonderful short story, and it made you think, and it made you feel absolutely awful. Being in that situation, by the way. Yes, not the ending. That could be a good ending or a bad ending. No spoilers. But yes, I suppose off the strength of that, the Roy Grace series sprang into being. I think the first novel, it may be the first one or the second or third, has that idea in it. But there we are. Okay, the next one is called Sun Over the Yardarm. Now it started off really good. Now, I love the idea of this story, but not necessarily where it went, if you will. So this is about a couple. The husband is in some high-flying job and he takes up her early retirement, and him and his wife, so yes, Sun Over the Yardarm, he's obsessed with sailing. So he has a yacht. And she quite likes sailing as well. That's how they first met and had their first shag on the yacht or something like that. They decide to spend a couple of years bimbling around the world on a world sailing expedition. At a certain point, they decide to return home to see their grandchildren because they're thinking they're growing up and they don't even know who we are. So let's take a path back. Now there's threat here. This path that they're taking may cause them to come close to Somali pirates and that kind of thing. So there's an element of danger in this voyage. But something else happens. There's a storm and something happens to the husband, which is really quite macabre, actually. But I'm not going to get into any more detail than that. What I really loved was the idea that the wife had noticed something wrong with her husband in the years leading up to sailing around the world. So I thought what was going to happen is that he was going to lose his mind on this voyage, and it would be the kind of gradual decline of his mental health, going mad perhaps, and her having to deal with that. It didn't really go that way. Where it went was okay, and it was quite interesting, let's put it that way. But it would have been better if he had just gone mad and tried to kill her. But yeah, I like that one. Okay, so the last one is Meet Me at the Crematorium. Now, this is a crime caper, one might say, but it's also a kind of sordid love story. And it's about a woman who's leaving her husband, a husband by all accounts who isn't actually very nice, a bit of a sadist, really, and enjoys doing naughty things to her. She goes along with it, and yes, they seem to get on okay, but then he's also a bit violent outside of the bedroom setting, shall we put it that way. So she decides to leave him for a German chap. So this is about her taking a road trip over to Germany and her driving around his hometown or home city. It's all mentioned, the places, but I can't remember them now. But I really loved the kind of lazy way, the romantic way she was taking in the sights of this town. I think it's around Christmas, so she's seeing like Christmas decorations and imagining her new life with this German chap. But something seems very odd about their relationship. It's a very new relationship, and I think they've met online. They've only met previously once before, and there's something a bit dark about it. So we know she's already come from quite a disturbing relationship with her husband, and now she might be entering into something even darker, perhaps. The fact that they decide to meet for the first time, or the second time, at this crematorium perhaps gives you an idea of where this goes. But I thought that was probably my favourite story of the whole lot. Okay, so let's sum it all up. Let's get the book down and give it a damn good thrashing. So I think the strength of some of these stories is it's stronger in the paranormal, perhaps. Or perhaps that's what I prefer. I like, that's the closest to my leaning towards horror and fantasy and even science fiction, perhaps. Those interested me the most, especially the true stories relating to the paranormal. But the crime stuff was also handled really wonderfully, especially that Meet Me at the Crematorium one and the Roy Grace starter. But I think it also illustrates the problem of having early success within a particular genre. Now, as soon as it started kicking off with this Roy Grace, he obviously thought, right, that's all I can do now. Because if we go back to the 80s and on into the 90s, he was writing these kind of paranormal thrillers like Prophecy here. But then, yeah, once the money's involved, I mean, he's selling them by the millions, my loves. It's difficult to break away from that. One assumes that he did enjoy writing these stories. I'm not saying he didn't, but it's a shame in a way that he went down that channel and didn't do a bit more of the paranormal. Saying that, I mean, I've never read the Roy Grace novels, but my wife does say that some of that comes in here and there. So you're still trying to crowbar it in, perhaps. And I think there are a few standalone novels here and there, but again, I think it's mostly crime. But anyway, on the strength of his writing alone, I would say, well, his storytelling, shall we say, I'm going to give this 3 out of 5. Now, I wouldn't go any higher than that. I don't know if it's for me. I mean, crime isn't really my thing, but he can certainly turn his hand to anything. So, yeah, he dabbled in various different things, ghost stories, paranormal, science fiction, a little bit here and there, and the crime, of course. And, yeah, it's quite a good chap, I would say. There we are. There's my review. Anyway, right, let's leave it there. Apologies, I had to kind of bimble through this because I'm so hot and I can't concentrate. But there we are. Cheers for watching, and cheerio. See you tomorrow for the live stream if you fancy popping in. And on Friday, if I can get the devil out, there'll be another review on Friday. Can you believe it, my loves? Anyway, cheerio.